Hi, everyone. Welcome to Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast. This podcast is all about farmers markets, how to increase your market business success, and in our current climate, maximize safety while providing people with fresh food. Farmers markets are essential. Whether you're a farmers market manager or a small farmer or food maker selling at farmers markets, you have found just the right podcast. This week we're chatting with Shiny Flanary, owner and farmer at Scrapberry Farm and manager of Come Thru Market in Portland, Oregon. Hey everyone, I'm one of your hosts, Bridget Myers. I'm a longtime farmers market manager, Vendor 101 co-teacher, and education coordinator at Farmers Market Pros.
And I'm Kat Fields-White, director of San Diego Markets, still an active farmers market manager, founder of Farmers Market Pros, and host of Intense, the Farmers Market Conference, and the Farmers Market Pros community.
And I'm Justine Marzoni-Mead, Tent Talk producer and marketing director for Farmers Market Pros.
Today's episode of Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast, is supported by EcoFarm, working to transform the food system by nurturing healthy, just, and ecologically sustainable farms and communities. Find more information at eco-farm.org or by clicking their logo on the resource page at farmersmarketpros.com. I'm going to admit right now, I go back and forth between EcoFarm and EcoFarm, and I have no idea which is correct. I hear it both ways from people, but they do an amazing job, whatever we call them.
Tomato.
That's right.
They're fine. Well, welcome back to Tent Talk, everyone. Today, our guest is Shiny Flanary, a Black queer farmer who's the director of markets at Black Food Sovereignty Coalition, the farmer at Scrapberry Farm, and the founder and manager of Come Thru Market, a Black and Indigenous market in, as Shiny says, so-called Portland, Oregon. Welcome to Tent Talk, Shiny.
Thanks, everybody. I'm glad to be here.
Yay, we're so glad to have you.
Yeah, we're so happy to see you again. We saw Shiny at our conference this year, and we just couldn't wait to get her back on the podcast. So we're really excited to talk to you. We're just going to start with some kind of background questions. So if you want to tell us a little bit about your background, did you grow up farming, and what other kinds of work have you done, and how did you get into agriculture?
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up in Oakland, California, so upstate from you all. And, I always say that Oakland is not a place that's historically known for cultivating little Black girls into farmers. One, because it's a super urban place, right? And when I grew up in mumble some decades ago, urban farming hadn't really taken off yet in ultra urban locations. And so when I was a kid, I remember sort of fervently and incessantly trying to grow carrots and sunflowers, kind of poking these seeds down in the cracks in the cement in my backyard. And I was really lucky to grow up in a house in Oakland with a backyard. And a lot of kids I went to school with, grew up in apartment buildings or small spaces that really didn't have any patch of land to call their own. So please don't hear me complaining. I was very lucky to have those cracks in the cement. And I grew, as you can imagine, just the most scraggly, terrible carrots and just awful sunflowers, or didn't grow anything at all. But I just kept trying to do it. And I never really understood why I had done that. And recently I connected with some long lost cousins and relatives, and they said, oh, we could tell you. When you were 2.5, you came to visit in rural Georgia for many weeks on end. And they were like, you sat in the dirt all day long, pushing around this little tractor, telling everyone that you were going to be a farmer. They were like, you were ready for this at 2 and 3 years old. And I had never known that until just this year. And so what a gift to sort of bring it all full circle. Where did I get this idea? And they said, well, here in your long lost family in Georgia, everyone's a farmer. And so I hadn't known that. So for, 40 some years, I've thought I come from really urban people, from Oakland. My family comes from New York City. We don't have any farming in us. And it turns out that we do. I do come from a family of farmers. I just never knew that. So that's really exciting. And, moving up in Oakland and moving out into other parts of the Bay Area as I grew up, I didn't pursue anything agricultural. I went to school at UC Santa Cruz to do nonprofit management. And so I have had a really radical and interesting sort of job experience set out there. I've worked at the health department, catching fish with my bare hands, to do mosquito control and prevention. If you've ever worked for the government, you will know that your resources are not always the best. So I had lots and lots of fish nets, but they were all really holy. And it became faster, like big holes. It became faster to just get tiny fish with your hands and hand them out to families and gardeners who had ponds so that they could control mosquitoes on their personal properties.
Wow.
Been a telephone operator. It is a really specific job. It was a very, one of many things I did there, but that's the part that always stood out because these families would make a day of it. Like they're going to go to the health department pond, get their fish, and the kids are really excited. And it became like, look, Mom, that lady catches fish with her hands.
Now they're going to be like fishermen because they
That's
saw
right.
you.
Yeah, right. So inspiring.
Somebody will have to explain to him later. You were inspired because you went to Mosquito Fish Day. You saw the lady. That's why you're a fisherman
Yeah,
today.
You're part of someone's history.
Story.
Yeah,
That's right.
It's like government lackey with flair, basically. I've been a telephone operator. I've been a tow truck dispatcher. That one's fun and unexpected all the time.
That's farmers market related.
I was going to say, sort of relevant to the farmers market world.
A little bit. And then, I spent over 13 years as a college librarian and professor.
Oh, wow.
And so that's what I was doing right up until June of last year when I left to do farm and market full time.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize it was that recent.
Yeah. So,
that's awesome. Where did you teach?
I taught here in Portland, in our local community college system. And in Oregon, just for context, our biggest community college is larger than the entire Oregon State University and college system combined. So really, really big institution, connecting with folks about their dreams and their goals and their aspirations. And that might sound really familiar to you all. When we think about how we support vendors and how we support farmers, we're constantly up to our eyeballs in other people's dreams and goals and hopes and aspirations all the time. And so it really, in some ways, hasn't been a huge transition. And in other ways, of course, radically huge transition. I don't go in a building every day.
Yeah.
I don't stand at a podium and give formal lectures. I'm not really on a national speaking circuit anymore. Although you all are helping to change that.
Yeah, we're getting you back on. We're sneaking you back on.
Yeah, that's awesome. I adjuncted for a few years too. And
nice.
So I have a little education background, which I apply towards now podcast and Vendor 101.
Yeah, that's right.
It's related.
Community colleges are, I don't know, just the most down to earth, or the people that you meet. It is. There's definitely a through line with working with vendors and people working in farmers markets.
Big shout out to community colleges. We need to give them more respect and support because it's a definitely more economical way for people to get educated than shoving them right into a university, which is so expensive and clearly not everybody can afford it or they come out with a bunch of debt. I would love to see everybody start a community college. So that would kind of... We're getting kind of off topic, but here we go.
Naomi, is Naomi listening?
Yeah, right. My daughter is about to start her junior year at a university, and I'm like, should have gone that community college route. It's fine. It'll work out.
It's funny, though, how all that background always funnels into expertise at farmers markets, because farmers markets are such a microcosm of community as a whole. So education is definitely a part of it. And I don't know about the telephone operator thing, but communication counts. And, fish and gardening definitely counts.
Yes.
So all of that really applies to what you're doing now.
Mosquito control in general is the Lord's work. So we all appreciate that.
So, but you're involved in a lot of organizations and projects around farming and farmers markets, right? So what's getting what gets most of your attention right now?
Oh gosh. Well, as you all know, it's grant writing season. And I have really never understood why we don't write our grants in the dead of winter, but go time is always go time in a big way. So right now I'm collaborating on a farmers market promotion grant with a local farmer apprentice program. So with Friends of Zanger Farm here in the Portland, Oregon region. And so we are working through finessing the finer points of our proposal to really collaborate on getting their apprentices into our training program, which is market focused. So, they teach production and we teach market hustle. And so that's a really exciting collaboration. It takes a load off of my plate because I spend a lot of time talking to prospective farmers for the training program and explaining that, like, oh, I'm not going to teach you to make a robust crop plan that supports your market goals. Like, you got to come here with all of that in place. And so working with this really robust 7.5-month long farmer apprentice program allows us to really have a tight baseline for how those farmers arrive at the market side of training. And so that's really exciting, and also has been, endless 14-hour days of narrative writing and just grinding it all out. But the narrative is complete and it's over to them to finish, dressing it up for the USDA. That's what I'm really excited and focusing on right now. And then, of course, running the market, because that's what we do.
Awesome. Yeah, well, fingers crossed. We have been emailing and talking to all of our contacts, and everyone is pretty much just like, don't bother me. I'm in the grant ready mode.
Yeah.
So our thoughts are with you, and hopefully by the time people listen to this podcast in a couple weeks, that will all be done, and you can just focus on all the other projects you're doing. But we want to ask you a little bit about Come Thru PDX, which we heard a little bit about at our conference this year, and we've been following, and I'm thrilled that I'm going to be in Portland this summer, and I really, really hope to be able to come and see you guys and see what it's all about. But if you could just give our listeners just a real quick kind of history of how that market came to be, like when did it start, where is it, and just kind of some stats about Come Thru.
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2019, I really started farming in earnest, and I joined a farmer incubator and training program called Pathways to Farming. And as I got, into the height of my first season, I started to learn how hard it is to take your products to market. And for me, I grow medicinal herbs and make wellness products for folks. And so, I, of course, had missed the deadline for everyone's market applications. I didn't have all that infrastructure. I wasn't ready. I didn't know anything about coming to market. I did not have a liability insurance policy. And I was really, diving headfirst into like, whoa, there's a lot that goes on in here. I think folks don't spend a lot of time thinking about markets. Think you just put up a tent and a table. What's the problem? And of course, you all and our listeners know there's a lot more going on than that. And I was really fortunate that year that because I was in that training program, I had a lot of resources available to me. And one of those resources was an actual urban farm site in Portland that's owned by the Oregon Food Bank. And so they said, sure, you can put up a little market. That's fine. And the things that I was so blessed to have that I didn't really understand at the time were, like full site liability coverage. And because we were at a farm, it was actually a farm stand and not a farmer's market. And you can do a lot more at a farm stand than you can do in a farmer's market. So the first iteration of Come Thru Market was there at the Oregon Food Bank Unity Farm site. And we had maybe 6 to 10 vendors on any given date, and we ran for the whole summer. And we had, so few shoppers because we weren't easily accessible by public transit. We were a little bit out of the way for folks. We certainly were not getting BIPOC shoppers, which is, we were hoping to see Black and Indigenous and shoppers of color. And so it was very, very small. And I'm going to say that we maybe had 150 or 200 shoppers that whole summer, right? So very, very tiny.
It was hard to come through.
Yeah. Hard to come through, for sure. And then last year in early June, I was contacted by a nonprofit agency here in Portland called EcoTrust, or maybe Echo Trust.
We're also confused.
Right? And they said, hey, Shiny, do you still have your tiny little market brand? And would you like to dust it off and try again? And of course, at this point, early June means we're just a couple months into understanding we're in a pandemic. And I said, sure, that sounds challenging. Let's do it. And I was very, very lucky. They gave me a lovely, very large venue and a bunch of staff time from their events production team and a lot of support. And they said, okay, well, here's the catch. You have to launch it in June. And I said, guys, it is June. And they said, yeah. So you see what we're saying? Okay. And so
it sounds like something Kat would tell me.
Okay. Fair enough.
Can you launch tomorrow?
Yeah. And so in about 2 weeks, we launched. And I would say our first market day was a little hairy. We were flying by the seat of our pants like you do. And we maybe had 5 vendors. There were a lot of miscommunications. Folks weren't as ready as they thought they were. People are, that early morning round of texts and emails where they're just like, it's not going to happen today. I'm sorry. And so, oh my gosh, we're launching a farmer's market. I only have 5 vendors. I'm terrified. There's a line around the block, right? Because COVID, we're doing intense crowd management. And also people really wanted to show up and show out for this new thing that they were just hearing about. I would say our vendors largely sold out of produce in that first hour and a half. And it was like, thanks for coming. And I was a little like, I don't know how this is going to go at all. By our next market, we had 22 vendors. So 2 weeks later, we had 22 vendors. We still had a line around the block. I think we probably saw 1,000 shoppers in those first 2 markets. It just kept blossoming, and we closed out the 2020 market season with 27 vendors and about 4,500 folks for the season, which for us, going from 150, 200 shoppers to 4,000 or 5,000 was a really big jump. And now we're into the 3rd formal season of the market at the same venue. So still supported and hosted by EcoTrust. We have about 50 vendors that rotate through 35 permanent booth placements. We are really growing and doing things. Of course, we've brought in the farmer training program, which we'll talk about in a bit. And we have such a beautiful variety. I think we have 17 or 18 farmers.
Oh, that's great.
That's awesome.
So food is really, really at the heart of keeping, farmers markets essential. And so we're just so blessed and excited to be bringing this offering into community. Things have shifted a little. The pandemic continues to create new pressures and stresses in all sorts of ways, but we're rolling with the punches as they come along. And just feeling great. And of course, with our grant efforts, we're hoping to secure a 3-year agreement to continue in that venue location. So, in a couple of weeks, we should know for sure if we're set for the next 3 solid years of Come Thru Market here in Portland.
Oh, that's so awesome.
Amazing.
So it sounds like it, as many things often do, start because they sound like fun or just something that you're like, hey, let's give this a shot. But, especially now that you're writing grants and there's a longer, you're looking towards the future of what Come Thru Market is and will become. What is the vision and the differentiation points for Come Thru Market?
Yeah, I think, so first and foremost, Come Thru is a Black and Indigenous market. So all of our vendors are BIPOC, are folks of color. And that's obviously a huge differentiation point from our more traditional and mainstream farmers markets. We have a very, very high shopper population of folks of color. So we see a lot of Black community members at the market often. We see a lot of Indigenous community members at the market. We have hosted drumming ceremonies. We have hosted dancing ceremonies, and we have connections with Aztec dancers and all sorts of rich cultural connections that show up in the market all of the time. We have a DJ collective that supports the market. So it's a very vibrant, bustling place that really is hitting the intersection of farmers market, but also that more international agrarian bazaar. And so it's exciting all of the time there. And folks, of course we can't, with health pressures, we can't let folks just congregate in the markets right now, which is challenging, but that's what they want to do. People want to just come there. I think we have people who would hang out at the market for 4 whole hours if we'd let them.
Yeah.
They don't want to come through. They want to come and stay.
Yeah, they do. Absolutely. Yeah. And so that's what we're aiming to keep. That's what we want to be known for. We want to be known as a place where you do get vibrant, healthful, nutritious food, but you also get a full community experience. And, what I say a lot for folks is, even at the Black and Indigenous market, we're dependent on white shoppers. That is the primary demographic in Oregon. It's certainly the primary demographic in the Portland region. But what we want shoppers who live that sort of dominant culture lifestyle to understand is that you're edified by coming to a market that doesn't center you, right? If your lived experience is one of being generally centered all of the time in policy, in community, in culture, it's really rich and rewarding to be offered to participate in other people's culture, right? And that's different than consuming other people's culture. And I would say that, generally American capitalism is really good at telling all of us that cultures are out there to be consumed. You can go and buy one off the rack and put it on. You can dress up like a culture for Halloween. We have all sorts of ways that we communicate to people that culture is to be consumed, but culture is to be shared. And so that's really what we're aiming for. We want to have the standards that folks expect from a busy farmer's market. We want to have solid products. We want to have farmer connections for families to really get to know where food comes from. We want to have, for our few gift and art and craft and wellness vendors, we want to have folks making those connections as well. But we also want to have this underlying foundation about a place of cultural exchange and sharing. And so I think that's what we're doing. Culture is our differentiation point. I think that people know that if you want to go to a market that has, 50 some odd 10 by 10s full of produce, there are other markets in the region that you can choose, right? Where we have very large farms who are excelling at their 3, 4, 5 stall market setups. And we know that folks know where they can go and have that experience. But I think we're the only marketplace where folks can have the experience that we're offering. And so I think that's important, and that's what we're going to keep doing.
So are your 17 or 18 farm booths more often small farmers, small urban farmers, not a big, 3/10 of the time?
Nope, we have no big operations. Everybody gets their one tent space to make it work.
Oh, gotcha.
Wow. Yeah, like that.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I know Chantal and the folks at the Black Farmers Market in North Carolina, I've heard from them, and we heard at the conference and things, that even at the Black Farmers Markets, most of the shoppers were white at that point. Now, they may have developed somewhat. And it sounds like you're doing a better job of bringing in BIPOC shoppers in addition to your BIPOC vendors. Do the Black farmers and vendors bring Black shoppers, or is it vice versa? What's the chicken and egg strategy in there? What are you doing in terms of curating and marketing that's making this work on both sides?
Kat, I think it's a both and. So I will say that white supremacy culture at large wants us to compress to this either or place all the time, that everything feels fraught and like you must make this decision. And really, having more Black farmers and Black shoppers is a both and type of experience. So both, you have to have Black farmers and vendors to bring in Black shoppers. Yes, that's certainly a part of things. And you have to have a culture that is welcoming to Black shoppers, right? So you have to both work at getting those vendors and those businesses into the market. And you also have to work at the market itself, and we have, I'm sure, all had really complex experiences with the, if you will build it, they will come model. And I don't know that alone does it, right? So sure, we're building it. And I don't think that, Come Thru Market just existing and putting out a shingle that says, hey, we're here for Black and Indigenous folks, we center you, is going to bring them all in.
Absolutely not. Yeah. So I'd like to hear what you're doing specific. Obviously, posting that sign will only get you so far. So clearly you're doing other things. What are you doing to make this work?
Well, so we have genuine, longstanding connections in Black and Brown Indigenous communities here. And so that's going to be important. And the places where we don't have those connections, we're making partnerships with folks who do, right? Because we trust our people. That's true of everybody. You trust the people that you know and you have connections with. And I will say, right, that those communities in Portland are very small, but they're also very, very deep. And they have really deep roots here. And we have many, many, many multi-generational Black Portland families. And so it's about, right, like I'm an interloper. I come here from the forbidden state of California, as we call it.
I know it's surprising you've done so well there. Yes. Portlanders tend to be a little like, where'd you come from?
A little suspicious of that Californication.
Yeah. It's true. It's very, very true. So I mostly just say, oh, well, I'm from the forbidden state, and then move on. But it's about honoring those communities in the way that they already exist and show up, and getting in there and finding out what is it that you need from us to make this viable for you? Where do you need us to be geographically located? It sure the heck was not at Unity Farm. And that's okay. That was part of the learning of getting out there and asking people like, hey, I've never seen you at this market. Why don't you come there? We would never go out there. That's just not where we go. That's a 20-minute ride once you get off a bus. I'm like, oh, okay, that's not good. And I think that understandably, Chantel and I are working in different communities with different constraints. And I think that there's some to this very compressed part of Portland and Oregon's long-standing racist history that makes it really apparent that when there's an opportunity, when there's a place, the time to support it is really now. I think the other thing that's different, right, is that as far as most folks are concerned, our big launch was last year. That's when people in Portland really heard about us. And so that happens right in the middle of Liberation Summer, right? That happens right at the time when we are having big national discourse around what it means to show up for and in Black communities. And I think that I absolutely can't discount the impact that that's had on launching. And I think we're seeing that wane a little bit this year heading into this summer. And so we'll see what the impacts of that are. But, I think there isn't, I wish I could give people the 1, 2, 3. This is how you get whatever your target demographic is to come to your market. But of course, it's a long process. And so I think, if you want Black farmers at your market, then you have to grow Black farm businesses. And so that's really what we figured out and what we're doing. And once communities see that, like, oh, wow, you are really putting the work where the talk is, then they start to understand, oh, this isn't a flash in the pan. This isn't your big marketing effort for a month while you thought about this one thing and then you move on to your next thing. When they see that you are creating these long-standing partnerships and really working to elevate people's goals and businesses, people they know, folks in their communities and their churches, people they see at the grocery store and at the drugstore, then that starts to really drive home that this is real. And I think everybody, whatever your culture and community is, you've seen that initiative that pops up briefly, that's just some lip service, and you're very skeptical and wary of it. And so a lot of it is about just writing that out. I'm sure that folks were skeptical and wary of us and of our intentions also. And we just, we persist. That's what we all do in farmers markets, is really...
Yeah, that's important. I mean, you started when it was the hottest topic ever, but then the other side to that is there's a lot of people that kind of let you hang in the closet and they're not going to come until they can trust that you're going to stay there. Yeah. So I think you got a certain population that was really excited because it was all top of mind, and now I think you're going to continue presumably those folks will stay with you. And then you'll have a whole different group that's going to come out because now they trust you because this is a second or third season, and they know that you're going to be there for them. They don't want somebody that's just passing through.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I think that's something that farmers markets in general, whether you're going to be a specific focused market with a focused vision, or you just want a farmer's market in your area, I think that's something to think about, of just like telling people, no, we're here to stay. We're really going to do this, and we're committed to doing this. And if people get the vibe that you're wishy-washy, they're not going to want to come to your market.
No, consistency on the vendor level and the market level both is just key. That's what we talk about all the time. So outside of your market, understanding that white supremacy is everywhere, how do you see it showing up in the farmers market space in particular?
Oh gosh, I think that and this is a sort of a sidebar that we had at the conference, right? We talked about like farmers market managers, we're all control freaks. Like we are clipboard jockeys and control freaks.
For sure.
And I'm very much
own that. We're owning that.
And also we sometimes let that, really take over a market. And so, I think that unexamined bias is probably the biggest place that white supremacy culture shows up in our market spaces. And I try to be really careful and conscious about naming the culture. We're talking about a culture. We're not talking about every white person. And it's important for folks to know that, like, when white supremacy is in the room, when white supremacy is the room, that doesn't mean that the people in the room are racist. You don't need a racist in your market to have white supremacy culture in your market. And
sure, the privilege exists no matter what your awareness is.
And so our policies are full of unexamined bias. Our boards are full of unexamined bias. Our vendor applications are just a hot mess. And so are our vendor handbooks, and a lot of what is soothing to us in the name of control is actually throttling to someone else in the name of inclusion. And so it can be a really tricky balancing point in there, right? But a lot of things, we talked about this a little bit at the conference. So an easy one to talk about is music in markets, right? And we as market managers think like, oof, that's a slippery slope that leads to no control and chaos in the market, and people can't hear over here, and there's too much going on over there, and this person doesn't like the market, and okay, nobody likes that guy that comes with the ukulele and like mangles all the standards. And so it can be easy to sort of get into our silo or our echo chamber, which can be just me and my market assistant, or just me and the advisory group, and make these very wide-ranging decisions that are really tied to one particular perspective. And so I think it's stuff like that. It's not big, insidious, oppressive behavior. It's not the mushroom guy yelling, racial epithets at new Black and brown vendors. It's our policies and our need for control really, sucking the air out of the marketplace in a lot of ways. And I think that's where the white supremacy culture shows up in markets. It is things like white supremacy culture is obsessed with the written word. And our applications absolutely privilege people who have strong written English skills, who really excel and have prowess and comfort at, distilling the narrative of your goal and your vision and your business plan into little boxes, in a farmer's market management platform. And so, we try to do things differently. Like anytime somebody wants to apply to the market, they can call me, email me, Instagram, find me anywhere out in community and say, hey, can you get a computer and type all these things I'll tell you? I'm like, sure.
Interesting. Okay, that's a good
do
thought.
That.
I'm a really phone-averse person. I'm all about the email. And so, I'm totally guilty of this. I want to hear your story via email on my application in those little boxes. But, that's a great thought. I would have no problem listening to somebody and typing that stuff in myself. That's a great tip.
Yeah.
I hate being on the phone, right? I was a telephone operator for a while. Like, what I do not ever want to do for a good time is talk on the phone. So what works for you is to send me like an Instagram video or some other voice note from your phone. Like, however it works, we'll get it and we can do the input labor, right? Like this, your ability to type in boxes has nothing to do with your ability to bring me beautiful turnips.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's perfect. That's such a nuts and bolts kind of tip, because I do think there's a lot of talk and some good intentions among responsible market operators who are trying to make markets less white, but coming from a white person perspective. There's a lot of confusion about technically, nuts and bolts, how to do that. Mm-hmm. So these are great resources to point out.
I've got nuts and bolts for people. Absolutely. I think that's the place where all that time in community colleges, right? Just seeing like that really helps, let's distill this to people. And I try to get it down to like 5, maybe a few more things that everyone who works in farmers markets can go out and do. So I think we have to give the work a home. This is a very concrete thing. We have a lot of ideas. We have a lot of value and mission-driven goals, but they don't have a home. They don't live somewhere. Nobody in community says, oh, if I go and ask Bridget, that's who will tell me the answer on where this project is at, which is sort of like, John Smith Farmers Market wants to do good. And that tends to be the beginning and the end of it. So it's got to have a home. And in giving it a home, there's got to be accountability and there's got to be authority, right? So people have to be able to do the work and people have to know, so the community has to know what's being done. So we're going to give the work a home. It can be a committee. Of course, everybody who's worked on a farmer's market has had death by committee at some point. But it can be a committee if that's where the work gets a home. But give the work a home is the first thing I would tell people to do. I would encourage people to design for feedback. I think we often assume that feedback just happens. Oh, well, if there's an issue there, tell us. But feedback is something you actually design for with intent. And you all know this because if you don't design it, then you get it everywhere you don't want it. You get it while you're walking very quickly through the market, trying to put out a fire. And this is exactly when so-and-so wants to tell you all of their thoughts about what's happening now, or it's too hot, you didn't close, or whatever the thing is, right? So design is an intentional and communicative practice, and our feedback should be intentional and communicative. The people that your work is most intended to serve, they need to have input. So in my market, Black and Brown community have to know how to get directly to me to give me feedback. They also need to know how to give feedback to someone who's not me, because maybe I'm a part of the problem, right? So designing for those different avenues of feedback. And when we have feedback, we're acknowledging individual experiences, right? Like we acknowledge them, they exist, but what we focus on doing with our feedback is root causes. And so there are lots and lots of ways to get at what's the root cause of a problem. But really being intentional about those pathways for support, particularly if we are opening up the floor to telling folks that we want to hear about equity concerns, then we have to have some really clear ways that we're going to address those with people. We can't just put out our box, right? Suggestion box. And I never know if I put anything in the suggestion box, whether that's an email or an actual little piece of paper folded up in the box, who's going to read it? What will they do with it? When do they review it? Do they take it to a board meeting? Do they just look at it and go, I don't agree with that, and throw it out? What happens? So people want to know all that if they're going to give you feedback. You have to be willing to interrupt oppressive behavior. So if we're going to say, I'm tackling white supremacy culture in farmers markets, then we, every single one of us, farmers market managers, volunteer coordinators, market assistants, volunteers, have to be somewhat prepared to interrupt oppressive behavior. And the good thing about this, right, because that sounds really scary. I think everyone's
really scary. I was like, how do you do that?
How to do that.
You tackle them?
There's like one phrase. There's just one sentence you need to have in your pocket for everything. We don't do that here.
Mm-hmm. Perfect.
We don't do that here is not an invitation to debate. It's not an invitation to sue me, right? Like we live in such a litigious society.
Oh, yeah.
But telling you we didn't do that here didn't tell you were a bad person for what you did. It didn't, there's no morality
or that you can't do it somewhere else. Yeah. It's like, fine, go do it somewhere else, but not here.
Yes, that thing exactly. So we don't do that here. You do need to know that we don't do that here as a conversation ender, not a conversation starter. And so when you get that out of your pocket, and this could be about anything, like someone is standing much too close to a shopper in line, right? And we're very, very aware of our space right now. And so you can just walk up and say, hey, I noticed that you're standing really close to this shopper and we don't do that here. Can I ask you to give some space? And then they may say, oh, well, their shirt tag was sticking out. And I just wanted to let them know whatever the thing is, right? Like, that's great. That's understandable. And we don't do that here. Thank you so much. Now, very often when we interrupt oppressive behavior, we are hoping to loop back and have a conversation with that person at another time. But remember that interrupting oppressive behavior is about centering the person being oppressed, and they don't need to be a part of that conversation. So let's say we're talking to the mushroom guy who is yelling the racial epithets, right? I'm walking in there, I've got my trays in my pocket, and I know that this has to stop right now. And of course, it's my vendor, and there might be a misunderstanding, and I want to talk about it another time. And so I'm going to say, hey, we don't do that here. That thing I just heard you say, we do not say that here at this market. And I'd like to talk to you another time about your take on what happened, but this is what's happening today. And then you have to be willing to enforce it. And so if, John Q. Mushroom guy starts yelling and doesn't like that, and, oh, it's reverse racism and whatever, then you have to be prepared to tell John Q. Mushroom guy to pack it up for the day, right? And farmers market managers, we have all kinds of reasons that we know we might be prepared to have to tell somebody to pack it up for today, and that it's going to be horrible and it's going to leave a hole in the market and nobody likes that. But, we do it if they wouldn't wash their hands. We would do it if we didn't see them sanitizing. We would do it for all sorts of public health concerns. And we need to get to the place where we understand white supremacy is a public health concern. So we don't do that here. We don't do that here is really, really a nice and easy one to start practicing. My favorite thing we can do to interrupt and shift white supremacy culture is to practice compassionate curiosity. And this one is so easy. You just learn to ask more questions. That's all there is. And yeah, we can talk a lot. We're not going to today, but we can talk a lot about how to ask questions. And I think those are really nice. If you have a reading group, or you have frankly, let's admit it, it's a wine drinking group. Right. If you have a wine drinking group, bring them that. How do we ask more questions? Just start dialoguing with the people around you. They don't have to be into farmers markets about how we ask questions. How do we get curious about people's lives and backgrounds and where they come from? And curiosity is not the same thing as getting invasive, right? Like, they don't owe us any answers. But if we demonstrate that our leadership in our markets are the kind of places you go and people want to hear from you, want to hear your stories, people start to understand, oh, this market is doing serious equity business, right? Like, these things go together. And the more questions we ask, the more that we're seeking understanding from a compassionate place, the less likely we are to leap to judgment. It's that simple. So get out in the world, ask a bunch of questions, learn to listen more than you talk. That's really hard for us, right? We've invented whole career pathways around talking a lot.
Yeah, like a podcast and a conference and education.
Right? So we get to listen to people like Shiny on our podcast. So I
do get to listen.
Yeah.
And then my last sort of nut and bolt piece for everybody is get into your market and do a culture audit. And so this is going to be the biggest piece, right? And I would say if you're going to do a culture audit, make sure you've done sort of suggestion one, which was giving the work a home. Who's designing this? Where's the intentional feedback mechanism about what you're doing? But a culture audit is about looking for, in your market organization, where's the power? Where is it really? And is it the place that your documents say the power is? Is it the place that your website says the power is? I think we've all visited markets where you think, I think that person is the market manager. And I think that volunteer coordinator actually runs this market and has the clout and the power, right? Our different structures and organizations shape a lot of how power flows. But just look, where is the power? And is it where we actually tell people it is? Look for transparency. is this market transparent in how it makes decisions? Can people find that information? Where would they find that information? What are our unstated norms, right? And farmers markets are just chock-a-block with unstated norms. So like, what is it that we think is normal and or right to do, but have actually never told anyone? So I did a guest spot at a local market that I'm not going to name, and had a vendor at that market. I was coordinating like a BIPOC aggregate booth for a storage crop event. And I had a vendor at like 8 a.m. during setup run over and start screaming at me because I had a tiny speaker and I was listening to music in the booth while setting up. We don't have any shoppers on site. No, it's terrible. You can't do that. It's totally wrong. We don't listen to music here. I'm like, oh man, I had combed this market's like policies and rule book from end to end, and it said that nowhere. And other vendors were giving me the apologetic look. I'm so sorry. It is true. We don't really do music here during setup. I thought, well, where would I have known that? And I've got, a little more pluck and resilience for this because I run a market. So I just, okay, cool. Thanks, guy. But what do you have in your market that is like that? What is the culture of the market that no one has written down anywhere? Because how does a new vendor find that? And if they don't find it and their first day they get castigated by some guy yelling at them, do they want to come back to your market? Did they feel successful about their day, the day at your market? Quite honestly, I was really thrown. And I, like I said, I have pluck and resilience to apply to this. And I still had to take a 5-minute walk where I like angry cried and was just like, wow, I can't believe this guy's screaming at me about a thing that, I dutifully read the rules. It didn't say that. So we're looking for power hoarding. We're looking for a fear of open conflict. A lot of folks are conflict averse, and conflict aversion, I think, is a symptom of white supremacy culture. We are often afraid to just say the thing and get to it. Perfectionism, right? Our markets are full of perfectionism. It goes hand in hand with clipboard jockey and control freak. We want it to be just so. And I think we've all heard some variation on something telling you that perfect is the enemy of good enough. And I really, really believe and abide by that. So get some compassionate curiosity going for your own organization. Know that you're going to find things that don't feel perfect, and that's okay. That does not mean that you are a bad person. It does not mean that you are a racist person or a white supremacist. Finding white supremacy culture in your market is guaranteed. So I'll just take a deep breath and let that in. You're going to do a culture audit and you're going to find white supremacy culture in your market. I will find white supremacy culture in Come Thru Market, the Black and Indigenous market, right? Like, it's internalized. It is the air we are breathing. It's around us. It's okay. You're not a bad guy because you found it. You are a good person doing compassionate work if you find some evidence of it. And so get in there. There's lots more to say about this, but that's the idea of it, is learn to ask questions, not to make so many assumptions, interrogate why things are the way they are at your market, design ways that folks can get you some feedback, and really practice saying, we don't do that here, because that will get you so far.
Such a valuable phrase.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think one of the challenges that we come up with as farmers market managers in terms of diversifying, especially our farmer base. Now, we're doing an okay job here in San Diego of developing and nurturing Black food makers. And some non-food folks, some crafters, and some people that are making body care things and all, but we're really short on Black farmers. So, and I think that's true in a lot of areas of the country, partly because there's been a really long history of systemic interference with Black farmers' success, so that we are short of Black farmers, just like we're short of all new farmers, actually. Farmers below a certain age are hard to find, but Black farmers in particular are tough to find. So what I love about one of the things you're doing is you're actually training farmers. And so I don't know if every market manager can do that, but maybe we can encourage somebody to be doing it in our own areas. Can you tell us a little bit about your farmer training program, how many farmers you have in the program, what you're covering?
Yeah, absolutely. So this year is our inaugural cohort. So the first cohort of our farmer training program at Come Thru Market. And we have 8 growers that we're working with really intensely. And this version of it is really kind of a 6-month stint, which was based on the grant we were able to get. And it's sort of beginning and end period. So it's a short burst of intense learning. We're hoping to really expand it to 10 months in the future. But we've got 8 Black and Indigenous and brown growers that we're working with. And the curriculum is really tied to Oregon State University's whole farm management book, which is really nice and accessible. It's full of interviews with farmers. It features a number of farmers of color, which is nice. And so just kind of tied to and tracking the content of that book. So we have an entire unit on planning. So we do strategic and business planning. They do a 1-page business plan. We want to augment what's available in local business development programs, but not replace it entirely. Because I've been through some of those programs and they start talking about CSA and budgeting and they're like, whoa, we thought you wanted to start a hot sauce business. We're not really sure what to say about this. So augment what's out there. So strategic and business planning is a big part of it. We talk about selling it, and I got to give, a shout out to Michael, who we just had on the podcast again recently, because so much of Michael Patrick's vendor success and farmer booth merchandising approach and try to distill that for the growers in the program. So a lot of merchandising, branding, what does your actual booth look like? Do you have a hot corner, as he would say? And what do you do with that? And so we're really looking to expand some of that content to get more into brand and brand narrative for the future cohorts. We spend a lot of time on business management. So at the heart of business management for this group is really record keeping, and getting together the budget pieces that help you really understand your cost of production. So, of course, from working with new vendors, they just want to know, how much should I sell this for?
Right.
And my first question back is, how much did it cost you to grow it? And very often they don't know that, right? Like that's actually fiddly math tied to your ability to keep records over time. So we're really working on getting their infrastructure in place to start doing that tracking. And I got to tell you, just at the last market, one of my growers said to me, Shiny, it's true that bagged like mixed greens sell so much better. And then she said, but I'm recognizing that they're costing me 5 times more in harvest. And it was such a beautiful thing. Like she had put that together all on her own in that reflection of like, looking at my record keeping and thinking about, well, how long did it take me to do this versus, to harvest and just cut these heads?
Were you just so excited you cried? Because I would cry if one of my farmers, oh my gosh, they get it.
It's the best moment.
And some dancing in the market aisle. I was just like, oh, beautiful. And now I'm going to make her come to the program meeting. Hi, Olivia. And tell everyone about that learning.
That's awesome.
Right?
Yeah, great.
So that cost to grow. And then the sort of final piece that we really spend a lot of time on is about keeping your business. And so that's going to be food safety regulations and risk management. And so in this first group, that's what we've really focused at a lot. So it is very market side. I like to often tell people that, the dream is free, but the hustle is sold separately. And so I'm not an expert at growing things. I'm really not. I've only been farming for 3-4 years. That's not my place of expertise, but I understand a hustle, and I understand the hustle from end to end, and that it takes that combination of storytelling because, really excelling in your booth as a farmer is about storytelling as much as anything. But it's also about really understanding how much that bag salad cost you to get out of the field.
That's right. Those are the 2 key things. It's personality and product and your cost, understanding what it's costing you to get it there. Mm-hmm.
So that's the heart of the farmer training program, is bringing those pieces together and really getting the trainee farmers to practice all of the time. So they practice pitches. They do storytelling with one another. They have an online forum community with each other, and they're in contact all the time. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? Hey, I want to explain this thing to a group of 3rd graders. How would you talk about this thing? And it's just so beautiful to watch. And then what we're hoping to really add on, so in that collaborative grant I talked about at the top, adding in a second year that provides a stipend to stay in a peer mentor and support group for the year. So, we give them access to the market, so they don't pay vendor fees. There's no application fee, nothing like that. They get, I think this year they got just short of $1,400 in a stipend to buy that infrastructure. So they've got pretty high-end fancy tents. They've got all of the tables they need, the coolers, we're talking a lot about verticality in the booth now. So they're out buying new ways to get verticality in their display of their produce. And so, what I think it's important, what I want folks to take away as sort of my closing thought on farmer training programs is that your metrics for success should be really broad. And what I mean by that is, if half of my farmers decide, woof, this is terrible, I'm not cut out for this, I just want to do my CSA and people come to me and pick it up and I move on, I will consider that a beautiful, glowing success because they didn't, go bankrupt figuring it out. And we all know those vendors who invested heavily in getting the booth just so, and then realized that, they just want to sit there and look at their phone. They don't want to have these conversations, and that's okay. And so when I work with producers who start to have that realization, it's okay. We can pivot to how do we get you enough sustainable funding to hire someone who wants to tell a story about your produce? And I remember Michael saying at the conference, the best booth workers you'll ever have were your customers, were the people who believed wholly in the product that you grow. They loved it so much, they fed it to themselves and their families. And so it's a total success if someone gets to the training program and realizes, I got to find that person fast. That's beautiful. Their business still has the supplies that are needed to send a representative to market. And they've got, all of that information for what they need to do with their production costs on the back end. So, really, no matter what happens, it's a win.
Yeah, brilliant.
That's
that's exactly, it's like you're listening into our Vendor 101 conversations because we tell people at the beginning, there's one of two good outcomes. One, we tell you how to do this and you know how to get your business started and you go forward and you make money, and that's a great outcome. Or we tell you how to do this and you realize it's way more complicated than you thought, and that's really not part of your dream, and you save all the money and time you would have invested in figuring that out, and that's a great outcome. So
yeah, but maybe we should add a couple other options too. It doesn't have to be either or. It could be a both and. You learned how to do this, and now you want to have employees and have someone get the market for you.
This is how you go do that.
Yeah,
yeah,
skill set.
So it's great.
Yeah,
we could go on for a couple more hours here, I think, and we may have follow-up episodes with Shiny Flanary,
part 2 and 3,
and 2 and 3 and 4. Yeah, we started a conversation at the conference that I want to continue. It looks to me like we're out of time on this one, but we're going to come back and do that. Mm-hmm. I want to talk a little bit about food equity and financial sustainability, capitalism and cooperation, and how those don't have to be or, they can be and.
Yeah.
And so we're going to be back to talk about that, but I'm sure that Justine is telling me at this point that this is a very long episode and every bit of it valuable, so she's not going to be able to make it shorter by editing.
Can't cut out anything.
That's right. Awesome. Thank you so much for being with us, and let's keep talking.
So
Yeah, it was great. Thank you for having me.
All right.
Bye, Shiny.
Bye.
Thanks for listening today, and big thanks to EcoFarm for supporting and training small farmers and for their support of Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast. The EcoFarm conference in January teaches farmers how to grow responsibly. Find more information by clicking the EcoFarm logo on the resource page at farmersmarketpros.com.
Farmers markets are all about community, and all of us, operators, farmers, and vendors, keep learning. Connect with people just like you from various parts of the country and share what's happening in your area in the terrific conversations over in our private Facebook group, the Farmers Market Pros Community. Please find us there, answer the 3 qualifying questions, and join the group. You can also message us on Instagram at Farmers Market Pros or email us at connect@farmersmarketpros.com. If you're just getting started in farmers markets, check out our Vendor 101 online course at farmersmarketpros.com. Thanks for listening to Tent Talk. Please leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you access your podcast, and tell us and others how you're enjoying Tent Talk. If you are listening on YouTube, give us that thumbs up. And be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss the next episode. Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast, is proudly produced by Farmers Market Pros, where passion meets profit. Today's episode was recorded and edited by Justine Marzoni Mead. Original music by David Mead. Thank you so much for listening today, and we will have another great episode next week, so tune in.